Again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this Government Affairs Brown Bag webinar. I'll begin by giving a brief overview of what the agenda for today's discussion will be. As I said at the beginning, we've got over 100 people signed up. Really appreciate the interest. I'm going to go over some of the active issues that are pending before us between now and the end of the year. Talk a little bit about the elections that occurred a couple of weeks ago and what I think that means for the business community and for AIM in particular. Talk about our Blueprint project, which I'm extremely excited about. And then talk about some of the things that are on the horizon, some of which rise out of the Blueprint project, some of them arise out of the political environment, but again, hopefully give you a sense of what I think is coming down the pike at all of us. In terms of active issues, as we finish out 2014, clearly the discussion that has been raging with respect to the budget shortfall, somewhere between the high 300 to somewhere in the $500 million range, depending on which estimate you listen to, but clearly a significant enough issue that needs to be addressed. My strong sense at the moment is that given the recipe that the Patrick administration has suggested, particularly the inclusion of local aid cuts, doom the governor's proposal to failure, at least between now and the end of December. I don't have a strong sense that the legislature will rush to fix this month. I'm sure the Baker administration would appreciate it if they could walk in on January 8th with the FY15 budget deficit corrected so they could focus just on getting their own House 1 for FY16 done. But that remains to be seen. At this point, I rate the odds at about even that something actually gets done, which means it's quite possible something won't get done. The other thing that we're watching with some concern, a wide variety of state agencies is in the process of issuing and updating regulations. We're watching a couple of things at the Department of Revenue. We're watching a few things at the Department of Public Safety, and we're very concerned about some things that are happening in the environmental agencies, DPU and the Division of Energy Resources. At this point, don't feel a need to go into lots of detail. My sense is that the calendar will run out on all of these issues, but again, if you're concerned specifically about agencies rushing regulations between now and December 31st, feel free to let me know. I think we have a handle on most of them, and we'll obviously try to make sure that the opportunities for mischief are kept to a minimum if possible. In terms of the election in 2014, I did this presentation for the Board of Directors and happy to do it for all of you. This information comes from the Boston Globe. The night of the election, I had the Boston Globe website as well as the NECN website open on my laptop. And as you all know by now, Charlie Baker is the governor-elect, as I say in the slide here, by a nose. If you watch the elections the way I did that Tuesday night, I think for me the moment when I realized who would win occurred as I watched the city of Worcester and the returns from Worcester. As the night went on, obviously the colors filled in, the blank towns turned either blue or whatever that color is, red, I guess. Kind of a crappy red, but a red nonetheless. And the city of Worcester had the Attorney General up by a wide margin in Worcester, but if you looked at the actual percent of precincts reporting, for the early part of the night, and particularly for that part of the evening when the Attorney General did seem to edge ahead of Baker, Worcester, only 2% of the precincts had reported in Worcester, giving Coakley that huge lead. What changed the analysis for me was when Worcester went from 2% of precincts reporting to 100% of precincts reporting, the Coakley lead fell to somewhere between 2 and 3 percentage points, and prior to that it was a very substantial, I don't remember precisely what it was. And at that point, the difference between Coakley and Baker was very, very narrow, but the thing that I noticed was that virtually all of the South Shore towns had not reported yet. And if you look at the map, you can see that the South Shore, for the most part, as the returns came in, pretty steadily came into the Baker column as the night went on. And so once Worcester came in with the really tight margin for Coakley, and so Baker ate into that surplus, and with the South Shore towns not having reported yet, it became clear to me at that point that Baker would end up being victorious, and as the night unfolded, and I did stay up until 1:30, but as the night unfolded, it became clear that he had pulled it off, and by the next morning, you could see the 40,000 vote total for Baker. So also, we spent a lot of time here looking at ballot questions, and by now everyone's familiar with the results. There's a great graphic in the Boston Globe, if you haven't seen it, that shows the amount of money spent per question and what that spending did in terms of its efficacy. So, and the point that the article makes is that spending a lot of money doesn't necessarily translate into success. And the question where that's the most obvious was in the gas tax indexing question. The no side spent quite a bit more than the yes side, and yet the yes folks were able to prevail. The opposite of that effect can be seen in question 2, where the no side of the question spent an enormous amount of money and got the result that's there on the screen. Same too for the casino question, and there was very little spent on ballot question number 4, which was the earned sick time question. And I'll talk about what some of the drag effects of that question are likely to be and what we're planning to do a little later in the webinar. In terms of the Great and General Court, the Massachusetts State Senate, the Republican Party representation increased by 100% from 4 to 6. Or maybe that's 50%. I did the math wrong. But now you can see the 34 Democrats and 6 Republicans. Slightly different story on the House side. If I can get the slide to advance. Republican pickups there, 34. So the Republican caucus on the House side has the potential, I think, to be influential, and certainly, not a majority, but I think cobbling together some coalitions with conservative Democrats might have the opportunity to influence the direction of the House. In terms of transition, the folks here on the screen have all been announced publicly. We here at AIM are obviously thrilled and very excited for Kristen, who's been named Secretary for Administration and Finance. As you all know, because you're all politically astute, a very important position within state government, a very challenging role. I think Kristen is up to the challenge. There's a lot of work to do there. There's clearly the budget difficulties that I referenced earlier, plus a lot of work to be done on health care, and about 8 weeks to pull House 1 together, which is probably the most significant piece of legislation that Governor-elect Baker will file in the early days. So Kristen will have her hands full. The other folks on the screen, Jay Ash is an old friend of Ames and of mine. We were actually in the State House together back in the late 80s and the early 90s. Current Representative Matthew Beaton, becoming Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, I think is a good move. We have a good relationship with the representative. And while I don't know Mary Lou Sutters personally, people here do, and look forward to her tenure as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, an agency that is quite large and has quite a few challenges before it, both on the healthcare side but also on the mental health side as well as the children and family side. And Steve Kadish as Chief of Staff. I don't know Steve. I was in the Weldon Cellucci administration around the same time that he was, but look forward to getting to know him and working with him and with the governor-elect. There are several other very important secretariats to be announced still. I think in particular the Public Safety Secretary, as well as the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development. And from Ames' perspective, I think the three secretaries that we work with most closely would be Secretary Ash, Secretary Beaton, and then whoever the Labor Secretary is as we move our agenda forward. And of course, we'll keep Kristen in the loop as best we can. In terms of the Blueprint project, as I've mentioned on this call before, and I'm sure you're all getting tired of hearing it, AIM turns 100 next year. We began the celebration of that event by drafting the first part of the Blueprint for the Next Century, a document which we did give to the governor-elect at our recent executive forum a couple of Fridays ago. We spent the latter part of the summer and most of the fall pulling the Blueprint together. We sought input from all across the Commonwealth, members and non-members, representatives from the labor community, representatives from education and higher education, economists. We really wanted to get input from a wide variety of people, legislators. And what we discovered through that process, we boiled down into the Blueprint, and I can tell you without any hesitation that the topic that generated the most conversation was the conversation around workforce. And lots of different aspects to this. I think workforce availability, workforce talent and skill levels, concern about the aging and the graying workforce here in Massachusetts, and how do we backfill what will be a significant number of retirements in the next 15 to 20 years. And so workforce will be a topic that we focus on as we go through the second part of the Blueprint, and I'll explain what that's about when I get through what we discovered for part one. Number two, no surprise, a uniformly strong business climate. One of the things that we heard, particularly as we were out into the regions of the state, is this continuing concern that Boston, Greater Boston, does well, other regions of the state do less well. And we need to do everything we can to try to even that out and to try to spread that prosperity as far and as wide as we possibly can. Efficient regulation, I think this, again, for business folks on the webinar, this is a clear concern and something that needs to be addressed. One of the state legislators that I had the opportunity to talk to described the goal in his mind is the goal of creating a smarter partnership between business and regulators where both are participating in solving problems, not in creating a kind of a gotcha speeding ticket mentality. And then lastly, a concern over the two most pressing concerns in terms of costs that we heard. Health insurance costs, which for my entire 14 years at AIM has been the #1 concern of employers, and one that's close second in terms of concern is high energy and more particularly high electricity costs, and the desire that Massachusetts do something about both. In terms of next steps for the blueprint, having identified the 4 major areas that we think, or that our members think, should be addressed, we're going to spend the between now and next November, creating a very detailed plan to address each of these issues. And the plan will include short-term, medium-term, long-term goals and objectives. Some of the prescriptive items may be legislative initiatives. They may be initiatives that we think the business community should take on as a matter of public policy. They may in fact be things that AIM as an organization needs to do, but we are going to build the second part of the blueprint in the exact same fashion that we built the first part, which is in a very collaborative way with our members and with anybody who's interested. So for those of you on the call who might represent other organizations, other trade associations, if you've got ideas as you look at the blueprint, if there are things that you think make sense, I would invite you to get that to me so that we can include that in the discussion about how to fix these 4 major areas. In terms of the centennial celebration, and this is where some of this work will occur, the annual meeting is May 8th. It will be a discussion of sort of where we are at that point. We intend to go back out into the field in the summer of 2015, again around the blueprint, and then the actual 100th celebration will be on November 16th at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. For those of you who have never had the opportunity to try to book something at the Convention Center, it surprised me to learn that at this late date, November 16th, is the only date available in the entire month of November 1 year from today. So kind of an interesting tribute to how busy that particular venue is. In terms of items on the horizon, clearly the inaugurations. The legislature is sworn in early January. I don't have the date right in my head. The governor-elect is sworn in on the 8th, and then other constitutional officers are sworn in a couple of weeks later, and somewhere in the 20s. One of the things to watch with we'll have a new Senate president. Senator Stanley Rosenberg is going to be the next Senate president, and he will then, his first significant task will be appointing the various chairs and members of his leadership team. And for all the obvious reasons, the chairmanship that I think is of most interest to all of us is the chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and we'll have to wait and see how that all goes. Lots of rumors, of course, and I don't believe any of them. We have a full slate of AIM issue committee meetings coming up. Taxation next week. We'll continue our healthcare meetings, and we'll be convening a virtual conversation with our HR and Labor Law Committee, all with an eye towards finishing up the AIM legislative agenda. At this point, I'm not going to talk too much about what we are filing other than to mention we do expect to offer up a technical correction bill. I'm doing air quotes. I know you can't see me, but technical correction bill on the paid sick leave ballot question. There are some drafting peculiarities in there that make implementation of the statute somewhat complex, and we're going to take a look at maybe trying to make some corrections, make that a little easier for folks. And then, as I referenced previously, the FY16 budget, I believe the new administration has about 8 weeks after they're sworn in to get that drafted and filed. So there'll be a very intense couple of months for the Baker administration and for the legislature There'll be a revenue hearing. They'll do all the organizational things that they need to do, and then the budget gets filed. And my expectation, if the past is any guide, that there will immediately be hearings around the state on the budget, and the work will begin in earnest in the spring. So a busy transition, a lot going on here at AIM, a lot going on here in the state. And just because I can't help it, I just thought I'd put this little screenshot on for your pleasure and then ask if anybody has any questions.